cape.
Welcome, Wargamers, to the final day of Edeneth Deepkin Week. Today we're talking about the Ethersea, which is kind of a long-awaited thing. People have been asking about it. It's kind of vague in the book, and so what I'm going to do is kind of compile all the little references and blurbs that the Battle Tome gives us about describing the Ethersea, really put it into one fat video. There is one dedicated section to the Ethersea, that's what it says in the back of the book, but really that's where the rules are, and it's just giving you the rules for using the sunken ship in your games. It doesn't really go into what this Ethersea as a kind of magic field does. So let's do that. So starting off, the Ethersea is a type of magic that must have been taught by Teclis, when the race we now know as the Edeneth Deepkin were kind of still in his graces right after being pulled out of Slaanesh. It had to be given to them by Teclis or developed really soon after it, because after they fled from Teclis, they had already known it. They went straight underwater. So that kind of helps us with the chronology of it. So what does the Ethersea do? Well, what it is, it's a magical field that you can project if you are a wizard, and it acts sort of as a middle state between water and air. Not quite steam, though. When you are inside the field, I will say, of the Ethersea, you can breathe as normal. Air gets a little thick, it's very humid, maybe a little foggy, but you can breathe. What's interesting is that creatures that live underwater experience the same thing. Again, it's a middle ground between the two environments. And it's great, it's static, meaning it's the same above ground and below water, that we all have the ability to breathe water. Water-breathing animals can breathe the air. What's also great is in this field, in terms of how it relates to water, gravity tends to stay pretty close to what it is in your natural environment. Meaning if you're an air breather who walks on land, you experience gravity, okay? We all step on soil. Well, in the Ethersea, you'll still experience it the same. You'll feel a little different, maybe a little bit lighter, but your creatures that swim almost in full 360-degree freedom with seemingly no effect from gravity, they do the same above ground. That's how we get the flying sharks and the giant flying turtle and things like that. If you were to see an Ashar and Tidecaster bring the Ethersea to you, you would see initially a thick fog. We know this from one of the Malign Portent stories. There's a huge fog wall. The air gets heavy. There's a strong smell of seawater. And just like you're underwater, it distorts light and sound, but it doesn't make it opaque. Remember, this is like halfway between water and on land. If you're wearing light clothing, it will begin to move as if you were underwater, like kind of floating almost away off your body. You just kind of move and it tugs you right back. So think clothing and fabrics and things like that. And that pretty much sums it up. The biggest thing is it allows the underwater creatures to come above ground and us to go underwater. Again, it's kind of its own environment, but it takes elements from both and kind of meets them in the middle. Now, if you're looking for kind of a description of this in action, there are some Malign Portent stories. I'll put them in the show notes down below. Most notable one is when the Deepkin first appear. It's a story about Stormcast Eternals being attacked by a bunch of skeletons, and as the fog rolls in, the Ethersea projects, and all the cloth and things like that on the skeletons tend to start moving around like it's underwater. They look like they're underwater. They move more slowly because they're kind of pushing through almost like you would if you were walking through a swimming pool. It does a great job of kind of describing what that looks like from a character's perspective, not so much what we're doing here, kind of an expositional one. Now, there's two areas that the Ethersea comes in incredibly important. The first one is on land, and that's mostly used for raiding. It's widely used for inhibiting your opponent's movement, just like the skeletons couldn't walk quite right. And it also acts as a defensive measure, because if you're shooting an arrow at a Deepkin, again, water refracts light, and so all of a sudden your arrow is not landing where you thought it was, just like you would if you were actual underwater. And if you're not used to being in Ethersea, it can be very hard to breathe. Again, air is thick, very humid, reeks of seaweed. All of these things kind of form together to make an opponent that, if they're not ready for you to come, puts people off kilter. And of course, they allow the bond beasts to swim in the air. And notably, the Namarti, which are blind, can feel the vibrations in the Ethersea just like you could feel the vibrations of movement in the water. And that's how they find their prey. Now, we know these things because that's kind of what the model range does, but what the Ethersea does underwater is equally fascinating. The biggest thing is it allows the race to breathe underwater. It acts as a life support system underwater. This means that bond beasts can be used as beasts of burden, right? Not all sharks are made for war. You can have them moving supplies from one end of your enclave to the other. And the biggest thing is it provides a good hiding spot under the depth. It's a relatively safe place. Now, there's one thing that's not really touched on, and kind of something I have a little bit of a gripe about, and that is the boat. okay? The Gloomtide boat. Basically, there's nothing talked about it in the lore about the Ethersea projecting objects, only that it creates this kind of environment, if you will. But we're told in the section that has Ethersea as the title that sometimes structures will appear as they do underwater, and that's kind of the only explanation we get there. I think it's a little weak. I wish there was a little more, or maybe a more important story that really featured structures and stuff like that coming out of the ground. All that to say, I have no explanation for it. But I want to finish up talking about why this is an incredibly cool power. It's easily the most lore-defining element of this army. Okay, right? Obviously, it's in your face. It's the sea creatures flying on land. It's the catalyst for what makes this army what it is. And the idea of merging two environments is amazing. And I do wonder if that's something that can be done for other things. For example, in this one, it's merging water and air. What if you merged air and fire? Or the pure death energy, or chaos, or anything like that? You can make some really cool environments the second you can merge things together. I love that this is a survival tool, and a weapon, and a terraforming instrument, and power all in one. There is no defense that's safe if you can alter the world that it's built on. You can have the greatest Duardan fortress ever, but all of a sudden if your defenders find it hard to breathe and their arrows don't work and you got flying sharks coming over the wall, there's no defense for that. And just in general, I love defensive measures that can be turned into a weapon. I think that's just a really cool thing. Like when someone has a shield that has like something built into it to make it a weapon, I think that's really neat. And here we have a power that was initially used to escape destruction by the hand of their own god being turned into the mechanism for which they can survive. And there's just something really cool about that idea, right? My method for survival is the doom of my prey. And that's literally the theme of the army, right? Think about that in terms of souls. The method of my survival is the doom of my prey. And that's exactly what the Edeneth Deepkin are all about, exemplified in their ability to master the Ethersea. And it's incredible that it was brought to the battlefield through the miniatures. So friends, this concludes Edeneth Deepkin. And thank you guys so much for tuning in. I know it's been a lot. There's a lot of channels covering it, but I hope that I've added something special by kind of diving into why these things are so fascinating. There's no new Age of Sigmar battle tomes on the horizon, so if you have an Age of Sigmar lore question you want answered, click subscribe, leave it in the comments down below. I'm going to go back. I'm going to take actually the next few weeks and just do listener questions. So tell me what you want to hear, friends, and we'll jump into it with AOS lore again. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed that video, and I want to introduce you to some awesome folks. These are my patrons over on Patreon, and they make this show possible by their direct support of me to buy battle tomes and Black Library books and all the material I need and the hardware support that I need to make this stuff possible. And if you'd like to join them, go ahead and click over to the Patreon page, to the link in the description down below, and you'll be introduced to a really awesome community of people talking about the hobby, sharing what they're painting. I invite them to be a part of polls to decide what content comes next. I raffle off every battle tome that I review, and we're having some great fun and discussions over there. So go ahead and check it out. Now, if you can't support in that way, that's completely fine. I'm just so glad that you watched this video here today. And if you have an Age of Sigmar lore question, go ahead and click subscribe and leave it in the comments down below. I read every single question and comment. I respond to as many as I possibly can, but I use them all as inspiration for future videos. So go ahead and do that now. And I look forward to seeing you guys on my next Age of Sigmar lore video. Thank you so much for watching, and happy wargaming.